Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Peace be upon you all, and welcome to another episode of Sapient Thoughts, where we discuss theophilosophical issues, we answer some of the questions that are brought against Islam, and we offer a case for the veracity and beauty of Islam, inshallah ta'ala, God willing. My name is Anwar Arafat, and today we are on the last two tools in our toolkit for how to read the Sunnah of Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him. Now, tool number 9 is what we are at, and tool number 9 is exploring supporting narrations for the hadith that we are actually reading. What that means is that a lot of times we'll have multiple narrations, and sometimes narrations will be narrated partially but not completely for certain purposes that the compilers themselves have. So they want to make a case, so they'll narrate a portion of the hadith but not the entire one. Now, sometimes that can be problematic, and knowing the full context, knowing the full narration will actually help us in understanding the hadith. That's why it's very important. If we do see a problematic hadith or we come across it, then we should try to definitely do this, compile as many of the narrations that we can in order to fully understand it. I'll give you guys an example for how this can be problematic. If a person reads the hadith of the Prophet, peace be upon him, and it says, "Man sanna fil Islami sunnatan hasana falahu ajruha wa ajru man amila biha." Whoever gives or provides a good example in Islam, then he gets the reward of being that good example, and everybody who applies his example as well. Now, without context, this could seem as if the Prophet, peace be upon him, is insinuating that you can do something new and good, if you think that it's good, in Islam, and if people follow your example, you get the reward as well. So it seems to make the case for innovation in religion, which is what we call in Arabic a bid'ah. Now we know that bid'ahs are forbidden. We can't innovate in our religion, meaning the faith is set, acts of worship are set. I can't really say, hey guys, I found a new way to worship today. You know, it's by doing this. That doesn't necessarily work. Right? The way that we worship is the way that the Prophet, peace be upon him, himself worshipped. So then what is this sunnah? What is he saying? Man sanna fil Islami sunnah, whoever's being a good example in Islam. What does that actually mean? If it doesn't mean that, because this seems to be contradictory, well, let's look at the supporting narrations. We actually find that this narration is part of a longer story in which there was a tribe that came, they're from Mudar. This tribe came to the Prophet, peace be upon him, and they had been going through a severe drought. They were disheveled. They barely had, they had tattered clothes. Some of them were barely clothed, no food. They haven't eaten in days. And they arrive in Medina seeking the help of the Prophet, peace be upon him, and the other Muslims that are there. And the Prophet looked at them. He felt completely heartbroken. He was disturbed by it. We know this because many of the companions narrate this. And the Prophet, peace be upon him, ascended the minbar, the pulpit, in front of all the Muslims that were there that had arrived for the prayer time, and he said, who can help them? Who can support them? These guys need our help. These are our Muslim brothers. Now the thing is, that same drought that affected them severely had been affecting the entire Arabian Peninsula. So even the Muslims in Medina were going through difficult times. And the Prophet kept on encouraging, nobody came forth, until one man from the Ansar goes to his home and brings back 2 large sacks, bags, one full of food, one full of clothes, and says, "O Messenger of God, here you go. This is for the people." The Prophet, peace be upon him, they said, we saw his face, كَأَنَّهُ مَذْهَبًا. It was as if it was made out of gold. It was so shiny and bright. He was so happy because this man did this. What does this tell us? That obviously the Prophet was happy. Somebody answered the call. And then upon this man doing that action, he said, "Man sanna fil Islami sunnatan hasana." Whoever is a good example in Islam, he gets the reward, and then the reward of everybody who follows his example, which means after he did this, everybody started donating more because they saw that this person felt courageous enough to actually give things that he might himself need because they're going through a moment of drought. But because he put his trust in God, that God will ultimately provide, and these people need our help, I'm going to actually sacrifice a little bit to help these people. Because he did that and he was a good example and everybody else followed his example, he gets their reward as well. It does not mean innovating in Islam. It means doing what you already have in Islam, but being that example that people can follow. Since he was the one who initiated that good, everybody who follows in his footsteps he's getting reward for them. Which is why, by the way, in public fundraisers, it is encouraged to be among the first people that give. Why? Because everybody who follows your example afterwards, you're getting a share of their reward without their reward being diminished in any way. This is one of the beautiful things that we have in Islam and how it encourages us to do a lot of good. Now we have the last tool, tool number 10, and that is reconciling and dealing with seemingly problematic hadiths. Now, for us, we actually have a problematic hadith that we're going to walk through, inshallah ta'ala, in the next series, and we'll post that soon, inshallah ta'ala. In the meantime, there are some tools and techniques that a person can do in understanding these seemingly problematic or contradictory narrations. By the way, there's an entire genre of problematic hadith. In fact, it's called Mushkil al-Hadith. And there are entire books that are dedicated to understanding and reconciling problematic hadiths that were written over 1,000 years ago. So if a person now in 2022 comes and he says, "Ooh, I'm finding 2 contradictory hadiths. What do you guys say about this, O Muslims?" We say, "Look, we've already dealt with this 1,000 years ago. Here you go." You can actually show them. Now, usually what we find problematic today is not what people found problematic yesterday, meaning in the past. And what they might have found problematic in the past, we find, actually, this is not a problem. I don't see where the problem is. Because tastes have changed, environments have changed, people's perception of things. What we prioritize now is not what people prioritized back in the day. So this genre is actually ever evolving. Scholars are still contributing to it, adding to it, discussing it as well. One of the first people, by the way, to discuss this was none other than Al-Imam al-Shafi'i himself, rahimahullah, one of the 4 Imams who have schools of jurisprudence named after them. He wrote that there are ways and techniques we can look at which narration was narrated after the other, which would make it take precedent. We can look at maybe one of the narrators knew something that the other narrators didn't. Maybe the Prophet had at once said this and then he actually changed it. For example, we have a hadith that says it is unlawful for people to visit graves. Then we have another narration that says it is actually lawful for people to visit the graves. So which one is it? Is visiting the graveyard good or bad? Because we have 2 narrations. Well, we have a third that actually says where the Prophet, peace be upon him, says, "I have forbidden you in the past from visiting the graves, but now I'm giving you permission and go visit them, for indeed they remind you of the hereafter." Why? Because that's death. That's the first stage of the hereafter. And we know this. This is why people get emotional. It's a very moving experience by visiting the graves. So by doing that, by knowing, oh wait a second, the Prophet now is clarifying himself that yes, at one point it was prohibited and now it's allowed, we actually have the context. There's no contradiction there. And this, by the way, applies to so many other narrations. And like I said, we do have in store a problematic hadith, and the hadith itself actually discusses issues related to women and their status in Islam. And I think this is very relevant and important for us. And we look forward to seeing you guys with that series and how we will demonstrate this toolkit in reading the hadith and in trying to rectify some of the problems that we might come across. Insha'Allah ta'ala, we look forward to seeing you then. Wassalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.